Wonder Woman is in theaters now, and if you haven't seen it, you absolutely should. And then come back and watch our spoiler-filled review.
Stand back. Or maybe not.
Hey guys, I'm Roth Cornett, and there are two people that you have been dying to hear from about this movie, and I have these gentlemen right here with me, Mr. Mark Andreyko.
Hello.
Mr. Dan Murrow.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Andy and I did the spoiler-free review because you guys weren't able to join us, very sadly. But now you have seen it, and I am dying to know, what did you think of the movie?
I could not be happier. I've seen it 3 times now. I got to see the ScreenJunkies sent me to the screening of it, and then I got to see another screening, and then I got to go to the premiere. And each time there's more and more to see in the movie. It's everyone I know who's seen the movie already has said, without being nudged, they want to see it again. It's pretty miraculous that this movie is so good. I have said that if I ran my own theater like the New Bev, I would do a triple feature of this with Raiders of the Lost Ark and The Rocketeer.
Ooh, I would see that triple feature now that you mention it. And for those of you that don't know, if you're watching us, you probably do, but Mark also writes Wonder Woman. So we're going to get a little bit more into the character and sort of how Gal and Patty Jenkins brought her to life. But Dan, what did you think?
Well, that's why I'm glad that Mark and I can kind of do our reactions together for this, because like, while I am a comic book fan and a big DC fan, obviously Mark is so steeped in the mythology of Wonder Woman, whereas, you know, I obviously knew of Wonder Woman and I knew her basic outlines, but, you know, in many ways this was my introduction to her as a character, definitely cinematically, but, you know, I read Batman and Superman. I didn't read as much Wonder Woman growing up. So I'm coming from a completely different place, but I'm reaching the same conclusion, which is that I really, really like this movie a lot. And what was so refreshing to me about it was that it was so sure of itself. It knew the character, it knew how they wanted to portray that character, it knew the kind of story that it wanted to tell, it knew the world that it lived in. And for me, with so many comic book movies and even blockbuster movies that are so kind of made by committee and show a complete lack of focus and clarity and vision on how they want to portray things, for this movie to then come in and be so sure of itself, I think that was really kind of like what Mark said. The amount of cooks that are in every kitchen for these movies, it is miraculous. And I think it's a real testament, particularly to Patty Jenkins, who had a real passion for this character. And you can tell very lovingly spent a lot of time making sure that they got this movie right.
Absolutely. Hitting confidence is the best thing. I think for me, we miss when I'm old enough that the dumb summer movies when I was a kid were E.T. and Raiders of the Lost Ark, both of which were nominated for Best Picture. So this is a movie that harkened back and made me feel like I was 12 again, because it made me realize how many movies aren't confidently told. This movie said, I'm going to tell you a story, and unlike a lot of superhero movies, there's no teaser at the end for another movie. It's not saying wait for the next one. This is a full meal, a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's a movie that tells a story that is so satisfying on every level. And Patty Jenkins, I can't say enough. If you ever wondered how a superhero movie should be made, hire a director who is brilliant with actors. This is a woman who got Charlize Theron an Oscar for her magnificent work in Monster. Gal Gadot's performance in this is not getting enough praise. Gal's performance, Wonder Woman doesn't have an extremely large amount of dialogue in this movie. And if you know acting at all, it's very easy to act when you have tons of monologues and lots of dialogue. She does so much reacting to the world around her. And that sort of silent acting, but being engaging, is really difficult. And her performance, everything in this movie is so effortless. It makes it look easy, and because once again, the level of confidence, the love for the material, the level of performance in this movie, Patty Jenkins will be able to direct whatever she wants for the rest of her life, because this is why you hire directors that have a point of view for these movies, because so many of these times they just look like commercials. And this movie is fully faithful to Wonder Woman, but feels like a Patty Jenkins movie.
Yeah, Gal Gadot, I thought, was, for me, in the modern age, well, going back a little bit to the superhero age, but for me, there have been 3 kind of landmark performances, hallmark performances, where, like, you know, with Michael Keaton, Christian Bale, Ben Affleck, you can say, like, oh, he's a good Batman, but I like that Batman. But there are very few performances in the superhero genre where you're like, this person isn't playing that character. They are that character. Christopher Reeve's the Superman was Superman. Hugh Jackman's Wolverine, I thought was Wolverine. I thought Robert Downey Jr. was Iron Man, and I would add that to that list. Is that Gal Gadot isn't playing Wonder Woman in this movie. She is Wonder Woman. She embodies that character, and she's so good, but not in a way that takes you out of it, saying like, "Oh, what a great performance!" Like you just buy her as she is Diana. You're feeling what she's feeling, and she is so great. And I agree, Patty Jenkins. I love when they're able to get these kind of. I hate when the labels, but these prestige, quote unquote, directors to come in and do these movies, because you can tell that they worked on that character so much. And
the chemistry between Gal and Chris Pine. What's fascinating about this movie is it's set in World War I, so it's the 1910s, and it's very period correct. But there's also a contemporary sensibility where it doesn't feel like a dusty old chestnut movie you're watching on, the movie channel. There's a contemporary sensibility, but it's not anachronistic. And the chemistry between Chris and Gal in this movie is fantastic because they're equals.
Right.
It's never, oh, this is my girlfriend, or he's a little bit of the eye candy in this, which I love that little bit of turn. But the movie is about equals and Gal just brings such an elegance and such a humanity, ironically, to a character who's part God, that the thing that she captures that for me is the most moving is Wonder Woman of all superheroes. All the superheroes will save us from bad guys, but Wonder Woman is about telling us that we have that within us.
Yeah.
And I'm going to get teary-eyed. I mean, I'm so emotional about this movie. But in this day and age with like all the horrible politics and the horrible things going on, having a movie that says, no, we all have this power, and it's just about hope and about love. It's the most rewatchable DC movie ever, because as much as I love Dark Knight and I can watch Heath Ledger every day, this movie's about hope. You come out of this movie, and they don't shy away from the horror of war either. They don't soft pedal it, but at the same time, it's about love and hope, and it's such a great message. And for all the women that I've seen the movie with, every single woman has grabbed me during the screenings and said, I didn't realize how much I needed this movie. Because in Themyscira, at the first half hour is the Society of Women, and all of my female friends have said it's the first time they've ever seen a movie where the women aren't, I mean, it passes the Bechdel test, because they're not talking about boys or makeup or fashion or their weight. It's this fully functioning, idyllic society of powerful women who transcend gender. They're powerful people, and it's just, people are like, oh, you're overselling it. I can't oversell the movie. I've seen it 3 times. I'm going to go see it tomorrow night at midnight. I'm going to see it on Friday, and I'm going to see it on Saturday. I haven't seen a movie this many times in the theater since Dark Knight, and since before that, probably since the first Batman movie in the 80s. And this movie is just like a really fine wine. There are so many different things you discover every time you see it. It's just spectacular.
So I've seen it the one time, and we did do our spoiler-free review. I just want to clarify a couple of things that I wasn't able to say then, because I love this movie so much, and there were some specific moments that I wanted to point out. You and I tweeted, and we talked about the moment that we cried, and I want to clarify when that moment was. Because again, this is full spoilers. It was not when Steve Trevor dies, because of course he's going to die.
Right.
It was when, as to highlighting what both of you have already said, they, without reservation, committed to who this character fundamentally is, and she said, it's not about deserve, as he said. It's what you believe, and I believe in love. And to commit to that idea and have it work.
And to be able to say that line unironically and not have it be
it's
smarmy.
It's almost a miracle.
It is.
That shouldn't work, and it worked beautifully. I cried. Did you, Dan? I know you did.
I'm not a big crier in movies, but here's
Very
what I will
Dan.
say. What I loved about you're talking about, like the concept of her, and this is why I think, and I'm on the record as not being a big fan of the first Captain America movie. This is the Captain America movie that we should have gotten when they made Captain America: The First Avenger. Because what I loved so much about this and what they brought out in this character, and this is dimension to Wonder Woman that I never even thought of or even knew it existed or would have expected from this movie, is this idea of growing up completely isolated from the inhumanity of mankind.
Sure.
And this idea that she had going out, which is that oh my God, this is so terrible. All these horrible things are happening, and I'm going to go and I'm going to save all of you. I'm going to do this one thing, and in doing that, I am going to save humanity. And this idea of that kind of idealism meeting the reality of human nature.
One of the best scenes when she and Chris Pine are walking in and he's delivering the Dr. Poison's book to the generals, and she says, "You're generals? Your generals in here,
Yeah.
you're having meetings. Generals are supposed to be dying with their soldiers on the front lines.
Yeah.
You are cowards.
That got applause in
You
my
are a
screening.
coward.
Yeah, you're a coward. Yeah.
And she didn't back off from highlighting again Gal's performance here. What was so extraordinary to me, and I think you guys have hit on this, the humor came from the circumstances.
Yes, these weren't jokes retro put in after the fact.
Exactly.
Right.
These weren't jokes that were added in. They came directly from the circumstances that she found herself. And you were laughing joyously because you were laughing at the idea of discovery, of ice cream, of a baby, of things you've never seen.
And
you
that's hard to play too. She didn't play naive. You can easily play naive,
Yes.
sort of, oh, look, what
Yeah.
is this? You could easily play her Ariel with a fork in the
that's
bottom
not
of the
what it
ocean.
was.
She wasn't naive. In fact, she's super smart. And they addressed that right at the very beginning when she talks about sex with Chris
Yeah.
Pine, talks about the
yeah.
pleasures of the flesh. And she's like, oh, I guess you need men for procreation, but not for the
Right.
pleasure. And they do it in a sense of with this modern sensibility, but not lascivious and not dirty and not in a very smart, very almost like a Spencer Tracy, Katharine Hepburn sort of way. And Chris Pine, I can't say enough about. After Hell or High Water and this, I'll go see his next couple of movies for sure
Absolutely.
because he's playing Gary Cooper. He's playing this sort of 40s swagger soldier, but never once does he say we can't follow her because she's a woman.
Yeah.
She's the most qualified person, and gender is never an issue. And the chemistry between them, the scene when she goes to the village and they're in the room together, and they may or may not make love. They might not. They might just sleep together or stay up and talk all night.
Oh, they
But it's
totally boned.
well, but that's open.
Audience, important question.
But even if,
did they or did they not make love, as Mark call it, or bone, as Dan prefers?
But even if they,
kidding.
but even if they do have sex, it was on equal terms. They were equals. It wasn't a seduction. It was an expression of affection and connection on a level that is so deeply profound. And the way that Patty, when they're about to kiss, the camera just goes off and you go out to the snowfall, is such a 40s romantic, epic sort of thing to do. And what was also great about this movie was it made us fill in blanks. It didn't spoon feed everything to us. And the one thing in this movie that I hope we harken back to is, it is when she crawls out of that trench for the first time and you see her in her full Wonder Woman regalia, and it looks like they saturated the color on it a little because of the grayness of the war. It made me realize we don't get the superhero reveal shot in movies anymore.
No.
We haven't had one of these since the first Batman movie, where it's like, this is opera and mythology. Let's celebrate this character.
And they rolled right into it. Dan, I want to hear what you think of that, because that moment is another one of those moments that I thought this could easily fall flat. This could easily feel incredibly
if you're not invested in the movie and what she's doing.
Right.
And again, the build up to that of, this entire conflict of having been, Chris Pine's kind of been holding her back the entire movie, saying like, you can't do that. This is not the world that we live in. This is not the way things work here. You have to get new clothes. You can't walk around like this. You have to put your sword away. And that kind of built up that tension to the point where on a character level, it makes sense that finally Diana says, no, this is the world that I want to live in. This is the world I'm making for you, and I'm doing this.
And then after they've triumphed and liberate that village at No Man's Land, he looks at her and he says, you did this.
Yes, and then I thought what was beautiful about that, and we're going to keep returning to this, the idea that they were unafraid to really go to places in this film that I think many other superhero films would be afraid to. She won that battle and then immediately lost it.
Yeah.
The devastation of that loss.
Yeah, her seeing the complexity of the human world.
And the realization that this innocence that she's applied to human beings, that getting rid of Ares is not necessarily going to remove the darkness in our hearts. Choosing to love in spite of that is such a strong, and what I said in our review, that there was a very beautiful, very powerful, strong message. That is a powerful message.
It is.
That is not an easy thing to do. We live in a cynical world. It is easy to be cynical. It is not hard to suffer and decide to choose.
And you can't watch this movie cynically. It refuses to allow you.
Yeah.
And the movie is Wonder Woman. It's a movie that wants you to better yourself, that wants you to know you have this potential in it. And it's so complicated because it's such a simple movie. And there's so many flavors and so many textures in it. And I got to talk about the framing device, because while there is no after credits, guess what's coming next? The framing device of her, I'm assuming is an antiquities curator at the Louvre. She gets, Bruce Wayne sends her the original picture that we saw from the first movie, from Batman versus Superman, in the email. And he says, I found the original, I thought you'd like to have it. And that leads us into the flashback. And there's something so hauntingly beautiful about the fact that Wonder Woman found true love with Chris Pine, and when he died, she's been mourning his loss for 100 years. And there's just something so powerful about memory and the depth of emotion, and not being afraid to embrace the emotion of this. All the second unit stuff shoots itself, all the blowing up and the war stuff.
Although beautifully done.
Beautifully done, but it was so nice to see a movie that was unabashedly unafraid to embrace the power of emotion, and it's I can't say enough about it.
Well, here's where I kind of was. If there's one thing that kind of the thorn in my side about this movie, it is, as with most big blockbuster movies, and it's because there's a certain amount of spectacle that you're expected to deliver, which is the third act of the movie. I thought that it worked in this film because I think my personal problems with the other DCEU films was with the third act generally, and the fact that you had these huge, massive conflicts that seemed out of proportion with the rest, and it just became like, oh, we have to have a huge action scene now. It doesn't really jibe with, or you're losing the character momentum. I thought that it worked in this movie. The reason I didn't jump off board is because you inhabit a world of gods, and it's two gods fighting each other, and you earn that level of conflict. You earn this huge battle at the end. You earn the kind of operatic melodrama that's happening, because that is the world. I mean, that's a credit to Jenkins and the team behind this movie.
And Ares' plan makes sense.
And Ares' plan makes sense. It does.
Which is a rarity in these movies as well.
I was kind of playing, leading up to that moment, I was playing in my head, and I feel like that may be a bridge too far. I think that people would have felt a little underwhelmed by the movie if you had gone this way, if there were no Ares. And if the thing that had made Diana withdraw for a century was this idea of, I lost Steve, all these people died, and it's man. It's not some external force. It's not some god of war. This was a story that was told to me by my mother to explain why men were so cruel to each other. And I could see, like, in my head, I was like, oh, I wonder if they're building up to this idea. And I think that would have been but that's a different movie. And again, I get it's a comic book movie. You have to have that kind of spectacle. But, for me, in my alternate universe, I think it could have worked as a movie where that is ultimately what does say, I'm done with men. When she says, you are cruel and there is no reason for it. It's just because you're imperfect beings and it's too painful for me to try to fix, and I can't fix it.
But she doesn't lose hope. She's sad for the loss. When she goes to London after the armistice is signed and there's the pictures of the dead soldiers, and she touches the soldier, you see that she's sad for his loss. But that loss, his sacrifice, shows her that there's still hope, that people have it.
Don't get me wrong, it's not that it doesn't work for me, but I think that there is an interesting alternate version of this movie where, it could have gone down that road. And, while the third act felt more earned for me in this movie, there was a part of me that kind of said, it would have been interesting to go down there.
I'm curious, though, because this is actually getting into the future a little bit, but I am curious what your take on this is. In Batman v Superman, she says basically that she's withdrawn from the world of men for 100 years. And we've assumed that that was all going to play out in this film. But like you, Mark, I felt that she was still incredibly hopeful and optimistic at the end of the film. She still felt that there was good that men could do and that she could do. So where's she been? What's she been doing?
She's obviously been out here, but I think what I got from it after Batman versus Superman and this is that she retreated from being the public figure, and she wanted to be, because she says in her little monologue at the end of the movie that she's still here and she still has hope and she still wants people to better themselves, that she was still here, but she took a back seat to it. She was there and involved, but more behind the scenes involved, and letting man discover the goodness and the potential in themselves. And then with the events of the superheroes popping up in the DCU as of Superman, Batman, and on the Flash and all those. Now that there are more gods among men again, she will come to the forefront again.
Curious what you guys think that I did have, and I mentioned this in the review, and I'm actually very curious on other people's take. I couldn't say exactly what I meant there, but it does rely very heavily on exposition. Now, I think it works beautifully when it's the storytelling, her mother telling her story as a child and things like that.
The oil paintings that come to life, the Renaissance god paintings.
That was stunning.
Yeah. And again, that would be cheap in any other movie. It's like, oh, this is a real shortcut. But again, because they're establishing the framework of this is the world that we live in, it works.
But also at the same time, let's talk about the editing of that sequence. It wasn't just here's exposition.
Right.
You were hearing this narration from Hippolyta at the same time they were cutting to Diana getting ready to leave the island and going to want to help end the war.
Yeah.
So they were mixing exposition with proactiveness of her character as a counterpoint. That once again is such a brilliant idea that I'm surprised no one has ever done it before.
I agree, and I will say that I found doing these reviews very fascinating because a lot of times I'll mention a point that I have a quibble about and say, well, I justified in this way. And then they'll say, you're not saying your real opinion. No, that's my real opinion. My opinion is that in another movie, I would have found that it relied a little too heavily on exposition. The reason that I think it works here is that because this is a story about mythology, it's about story. It's about the story of how we become what we are. So that for me worked. It did get a little heavy though. It was because it was bookended in the beginning and the end with Diana's voiceover. And then it was told, Ares then said, actually, this is the real story.
There were definitely they did rely on flashbacks. Again, these are narrative shortcuts, and I'm with you. Sometimes I didn't jump off the train. But sometimes I was like, okay, well, they are taking a bit of a shortcut here, which is why, this isn't a flawless film. Very few films are flawless. But again, I think a lot of people are going to say, particularly I rail against the third act in movies all the time. It's all noise, it's all spectacle, blah, blah, blah. You lose track. And I can already, people are going to say oh, well, why did you say that about Batman v Superman or Man of Steel, but Wonder Woman's the same thing? And it's but it's not.
The same thing.
People see the same elements in movies, and they say well, the same two things are in these same two movies. Why do you have a problem with it in that movie? And you don't have it's all about execution. It's about the world. It's about the universe.
And the third act of this movie isn't a half an hour of her fighting Ares.
Exactly. It's 10 minutes.
It's 10 minutes maximum. And while they're fighting, and it's not about the fight. It's not about the fight. It's not about destruction. It's about also, and this ties into why I think some of the exposition did work for me, because in a lot of movies, a lot of origin stories, you are being told the story. In this, you are discovering you are with her. You are going on the journey the character is, and you are learning things at the same time she is, which is a lot different than being told things. You get to experience them with her, and once again, her reactions to things when they're walking to the front, and she sees a soldier with a leg blown off, and she's like, "I can help him," and they're like, "We don't have time." And she sees these horses stuck in the mud and the men are whipping. She's like, why are those men being so cruel to the animals? She's just so overwhelmed by all the sensory stuff that's going on, and you feel that with her. And it's just so effortlessly done. I keep going back to that word, but I've never, when you're in the hands of a confident filmmaker, you just trust them implicitly. And I was there from the opening frame of this movie. I was like, I trust you.
Yeah.
I'm going to follow you wherever you take me.
You were taken on the journey because her point of view is so strong. And that's what I was saying about the humor, not just the humor for me, but we were talking about this earlier. When you think about the amount of things that Patty Jenkins had to balance in this film, you have huge mythology, gods, right? Actual gods that we're familiar with, very familiar with in our culture, right? That's where you have the horror of war. You have a woman out of time in the sense that this isn't her world. To her, there is no question that she would belong in that room. She's not going in there because she's got moxie. She's going in there because there's no question for her that she shouldn't go in there to any room and say exactly what she thinks. And it's played, that's why it works. And that's why I think her innocence works. And that end sequence, you're right, Dan. Many third acts feel very similar, but this is two versions of heroism. And one is a human man making the ultimate sacrifice, and one is a demigoddess.
Chris Pine's expressions when the plane is going up, and he's like, he realizes what he has to do, and he knows he's making a noble sacrifice, but he also just met the love of his life, and he just plays just his facial reactions, and that's the other thing. Patty trusts the actors to sell the story. There's not special effects where they don't need to be there. This is a movie about people and relationships, and just watching his face before he makes that final sacrifice you are smiling because you are in such awe of him as a character, and you're sad because of his sacrifice, but you get that he has to do it. He even says to her, "No, I can win this battle. You're going to win the war."
Well, Chris Pine does something great, and I don't know if this was something he brought to it or something Patty Jenkins gave to it, but he does such a great thing in that last scene with Diana where we see it played twice. And it's such a small thing, but again, it shows how you can take a scene that could be sappy and cliched, and you ground it in reality, which is that he's talking to her, and he's trying desperately to convey, but he keeps looking, and again, this seems so small, but he keeps looking over his shoulder because he knows that like he very much wants to stay in the moment, but he also knows that he's got to
That plane's getting
gotta get on that
getting further
plane.
away. And, but that, and again, it's such a small thing, but it goes to show you how very small, subtle things can help ground something in reality.
Well, and also along
that
the
idea of just looking back and you realize you feel that just a physical motion, you feel that conflict that he has in the scene of like I love this person and I'm trying to communicate with her. She can't hear me. I want to stay here. I have to go here, and it's that idea. And Chris Pine, this is his best performance, and I'm a huge Star Trek fan.
And they
this
also did a thing.
This and Hell and High Water.
The humanization they do of it, because dealing with gods and demigods and mythology. But once again, the little details that made this that are going to make this movie be huge and be a really important, impactful movie in so many ways culturally. Yes, Wonder Woman is a superhero. Yes, Wonder Woman is a goddess. But when she gets cut when the Germans attack, and then they take the bandage off, and they're like, "Oh, you healed quickly." And then the scene with Chris Pine when he's professing his love to her before he's going to go on the plane, bombs have gone off, and she can't hear. She's got that, and by playing with that humanizes her because she's not invulnerable. She's not a god from on high. She's not perfect. She can be hurt, and and her ears are ringing, she's like, "I can't hear you. What are you saying to me, Steve?" And then before the final moment with Ares, she hears him say, "I love you," and he gives her the watch, and you're like, oh. And to be able to pull off that same scene twice with that quickness next to each other and have it work and have both of them be deeply impactful emotionally on two different levels is just insane. We're going to be so spoiled. I want Patty Jenkins to direct every superhero movie now.
And it'll be interesting to see what happens and sort of what the response is, because I agree, and we've talked about this a lot, and I just can't emphasize where I'm so impressed is the level of things that she was balancing, that she had to execute in this, locating this in time, telling this other part of the style, the origin story for people that really don't understand who maybe Wonder Woman is, and then having frankly, just the straight up, I can't think of a better word. What balls do I call them? Ovaries, whatever it is. The strength of character and will on everyone's part, by the way. The studio too.
Oh,
to not
yes.
back away from a character that is unapologetically a believer in the goodness of man.
And there's one thing that we forgot to mention that I think is also super important, because we've been talking about the character work and how nuanced everything is in this movie. The fight scenes in this movie, every single one of these fight scenes, you know exactly where you are in space, you know the geography of every room and every moment, and you are invested in the fight scenes. These aren't cross-cut where you don't know what's happening. These are the fight scenes that work because you understand, because they choreograph them and you know exactly where you are in every moment and what the risk is. And that's hard to do because in a lot of these fight scenes, it's 12 or 13 guys firing guns at her and she's spinning around and dodging, and you can draw lines through those scenes when it comes out on DVD and you want to freeze frame them. The choreography and the attention to detail in every aspect of this movie is just it's just mind-boggling that that there's that much detail, and it's also such a vibrant, alive movie.
Well, it's a reminder that fight scenes shouldn't be about the fight. It should be about the characters who are fighting. Yeah. That's a very, I feel like that's a trap that a lot of movies fall into, is they have a big fight scene and they think that the action is what it's about. And really, at its core, what it should be about is featuring, there should be a reason for what you're seeing, and I felt like every one of these, it was showing us a different ability or
every set piece was character based,
exactly,
which was so refreshing.
Which is, again, these are things that every movie should be doing, but I think the reason that we're just kind of sitting here like, wow, is that not a lot of movies do them. And I'm not just talking about DC movies, I'm talking about Marvel movies, I'm talking about big action movies. Every movie, it's rare that you see somebody bring this amount of care and detail to the characters, and it just goes to show you, people wring their hands and say, like, what's wrong with movies? Why are movies not good anymore? It's
point of view.
It's bringing something to a
passion
character, and point of view.
And she brought all of it, and there's not a false performance in this movie. Every single performance is phenomenal.
Well, I do think that, first of all, because we talked about this at lunch, Mark, we have to take a moment to say everything about Robin Wright and how much she does in
Robin
about
Wright was great.
7 minutes of screen time.
Robin Wright's performance in this is
that
like
one
Hannibal
moment.
Lecter,
Yeah,
and like Judi Dench in Shakespeare in Love. They're in 10 minutes of the movie, and Robin Wright does with one arched eyebrow what most actors can't do.
There was
with
also a very
career.
small smile. The moment is when she sees her niece running and fake fighting, and she has to tell her in one look, don't do this right now because you're gonna get in trouble with your mom. I should not be amused, but I'm about to crack up, and you need to. I know that eventually and soon you must do this.
And I will do it
You have
with
no
you.
choice, and I will do it with you.
Well, and something else that they did that I thought was really smart was with Gal Gadot, you embrace her person, you embrace the strengths that she brings. And what I loved is that they had everyone, they didn't say, okay, I need you to Americanize your speech to play Wonder Woman. Everyone matched her speech, which allowed her to express her character more naturally and more personally herself. And they said to other people, okay, she doesn't speak like you, you speak like her. And I thought that was so great, is that they matched her speech. And that again is again a small thing that personalizes the character and the performance and takes something away from Gal Gadot, where she's not having to say, like, I need to express this emotion, but also in the back of my head I have to keep my diction and my accent.
She wasn't doing the Cumberbatch American accent the whole time.
She was allowed to be herself, and they went to the other actors and said, like, and Robert, I remember listening to Robin Wright. She nailed that. But again, you don't.
And let's also give a shout out.
Small things like that really make a huge difference in a movie like this.
And let's give a shout out to Connie Nielsen, who was so regal. And at the moment when Diana leaves the island, and I love the fact that Hippolyta knows she has to do this, and she says, "You are my greatest love and my greatest sorrow." It's amazing.
It's chilling.
The level of emotion. It's so nice to see a dumb summer movie that not only is a thrill ride and a visceral thrill ride, but at an emotional level, it makes you want to be a better person.
And it does make you want to be a better person. She makes you want to, that's what Wonder Woman's supposed to do, and she makes you want to rise up and be your best self. And I will say too, again, not relying on exposition at all is the fact that who Diana is the exact combination of the two greatest influences, her mother and her aunt. And they never say that overtly, they just show you who her mother is and they show you who her aunt is, and she is the exact blend and marriage of those two things. And I thought that was beautiful. You never had to tell me that. You trusted I would get it.
Yeah.
And I do. And every single performance on that island, again, that's the type of thing I think a lot of people were going, can that work? And it absolutely does. And it never feels to me, I know the sort of women in this world is going to be a big discussion. Nothing felt as if it wasn't universal to me. Nothing felt like it wasn't inviting everyone to be a part of this.
That's something that I liked, was like, this is obviously an important female superhero movie. But a thing that I loved is at no point does this movie say, I am an important female superhero movie. Everything that this movie has to say about gender and society is inherent to the story because we're in the 1910s of London. And for Steve to have brought Diana to London and have her walk into a room full of men negotiating an armistice or talking about an armistice, and to have no one say anything, that would have been disingenuous to the time. So again, to do it organically and to say, like, we're going to say these things, but we're not going to preach, we're not going to lecture, we're not going to, draw attention to this. We're just going to let this be what it is. Because I think that Patty Jenkins and everyone behind the movie knew what this movie was. I think they knew that it was important on so many levels. It was important as a female superhero movie. It was important as a superhero movie in general. It was important as a DC movie, as a summer movie, as a blockbuster. Like, there were so many levels that this movie had pressure to succeed on. And the fact that they never really, it seemed like, bowed to the pressure on any of those fronts to say, we have to acknowledge how much pressure we're under to deliver, and we're going to over deliver, or we're going to take the audience out. And the fact that it was just organically, this is what it is. And
it's hats off to Warner Brothers for allowing a woman who made an $8 million low budget movie 10 years ago to bring her sensibility to a billion-dollar franchise. And I really do think that this movie is going to be historically one of the big superhero movies, because I think it's going to overperform everyone's wildest expectations, because I know everyone I've seen it with at every screening says, I could watch that movie again right now.
I'm probably going to go see it again. And I mean, that is rare, even with really good, I didn't see Civil War twice. I didn't see, and again, I think it's because of this freshness. It's the idea of this is such a fresh character. It's one we saw a very little bit in Batman v Superman, but the idea of just this world. And I want to know how Patty Jenkins shot the Themyscira stuff, because it looked like it was shot on a different stock. It looked like it was shot on film. It had a deeper, richer. Again, not to harp on these small choices that people might not register that make big differences in how you perceive a movie.
It was vibrant in a way that our world, first of all, I located in space where they were physically in the world, but also sort of the dreariness and the ugliness of war. And she comes into London and goes, "It's so ugly. Why does anyone like this place?" And I thought it was hilarious, because to her, can you imagine coming from that land?
Well, then she instantly cuts from her saying this is hideous, and you see the cityscape, the aerial shot of London, and it was the Industrial Revolution.
Of course, it was hideous.
It was like the air in China now. Everything was covered in soot and dirt and filth, and you're like,
But that kind of specificity is what locates you in time, and I think that's what that tells you it tells you what this world is without having to, the vibrancy of where she's from, the aliveness of it, versus our world, particularly in those moments that were so tragically ugly and the baser parts of humanity. I thought that those were beautiful choices as well. I do have to quickly ask you guys what you thought of, because I think this will be a topic, of the villains. Villains in comic book movies is a large discussion. There's not a lot of time. You have two great heroes in this movie, and that's what I would say. You have a wonderful hero in Steve from the world of men. He's very human. He does what he can only do as a human being. He owns his frailty. And then you have this larger than life hero, which I think is one of the big things that DC offers. I'd love you to speak to that. What do we think of the villains in their development?
Well, for me, there were so many masters that needed to be serviced in this movie. There was introducing this character. There was bringing people up to speed. There was telling the story. There was telling the story in period, in contemporary. That I liked the Danny Houston character. I liked the general. He reminded me of, and I'm going to be dating myself here, he reminded me of when Ronald Reagan got shot, and Alexander Haig, who was the Secretary of State, did a press conference and said, "I am in control now." And everyone was like, well, actually, no, in the order of things, there's a vice president before you. And everyone freaked out. And he's this guy that loves war. That has defined who he is. And I loved, with minimal dialogue and minimal screen time, how Dr. Poison was portrayed. Because there's that scene at the gala where Chris Pine is talking to her and trying to get information from her. And he's kind of getting to her because she has the scars on her face and that great porcelain mask. And she's 1 second away from falling for him, and then Diana walks in, and every eye in the place turns to her in that blue dress, and she's like, "Oh,
spectacles, really? Now she's not the most beautiful woman in the world." That covered it up. That was my favorite line.
So I thought the villains worked really, really, really well, because this wasn't Darth Vader. This wasn't Darkseid. The villain was war and humanity.
There was a Zeus, you are my father moment.
Yes, but
Not quite as on the nose, though.
But that works because in the sense, with Wonder Woman's reinterpretation, the idea that she's the daughter of Zeus and Hippolyta was brought in when Brian Azzarello and Cliff Chang did the New 52 version. But I loved the idea that Hippolyta told her that I carved you from clay and my love and the gods brought you to life, and that's the story she told. And then when Diana finds out that was the story she told to protect her, and when she says to Ares, she says, "Goodbye, brother," and she accepts her place in the food chain. There's just so much. And there's one other thing in this movie that I loved. As a writer, and as people that see lots of movies, we do the follow-through thing. Oh, they're referencing this gun here. That's going to show up in the third act. There's a sequence in the movie where the Germans are attacking Themyscira at the beginning, and one of the Amazons grabs a shield and says to another Amazon, "Shield," and the Amazon runs and jumps on the shield and does an aerial effect. Later in the movie, when Diana and the soldiers are rescuing this village, a tank blows up, and there's the hood of the car. The hood of the tank, and Chris Pine says, "Lift this up," and the men cover, and they're like, "Why are we doing this?" He says, "Diana, shield," and it's a throwback. And what that had impact to me, because the characters in the movie were smart and listening to each other, and you realize how often characters don't listen to each other in movies because the plot doesn't let them. And in this movie, you're like, oh, these people pay attention, these people are smart, and to have heroes who are smart and act like smart people is just so refreshing.
Circling back to the villains, I thought Dr. Poison, that was just a textbook way of bringing a quote-unquote ridiculous comic book character to the screen and not making it laughable. I thought that Danny Houston, if I'm being 100% honest, I kind of saw the David Thewlis Danny Houston switcheroo coming, just because there's kind of a rule in movies where if you have a big actor and a supporting role who disappears for a while and hasn't really had a huge impact on the movie, odds are that character is going to come back in the third act to play a major role. So I kind of had, and they were very coy about how they were treating.
They do kind of lean into it a little because she's always saying that General Dusseldorf, Ludendorff is Ares,
but
and
I felt like
he's
it was
not.
too. But I knew he wasn't. So and then by process of elimination, it was either Lucy Davis or David Thewlis, and I guess it was David Thewlis. I thought for me, Ares.
Lucy Davis, my heart would have shattered because I loved her just the way she was.
I thought for me, Ares again was better as an abstract concept than David Thewlis in armor. I thought that the emotion behind that battle was a little more effective to me than the actual villain itself. It was kind of another, hey, we're going to introduce a big villain. He's going to be gone in 10 minutes. Again, that's a comic book movie convention. What makes it work is the emotion behind it. That when she turns and when Steve blows up and I was expecting the kind of cheesy, I'm going to break out and beat the crap out of the villain. And I like that they went instead to like, this is going to be the moment where I turn against humanity. And so that kind of thematic struggle was what I liked more than Ares as a character. But I think that, again, more than the villains itself, it was the thematics, what was happening behind it.
I agree.
More than the actual villains. Was Ares the best villain I've ever seen in a movie? No, I thought Danny Houston was a good heavy. He was a really good, comic book heavy. He was very menacing. Dr. Poison for me was kind of the most, if you're going creepy and effective and memorable one, like I just love what was done with her character the most. But for me, more than the persona of Ares, it was everything that was going on.
I agree, and I think that final moment worked, not because, it could have felt like a battle sequence that we've seen a lot before, but it was really about her internal battle. And I think that the way Patty Jenkins chose to illustrate that, as we talked about before, was replaying those two scenes.
Yeah.
It was about Diana taking in and accepting herself and committing to that and following through with that, because we know that Ares isn't going to win.
Yeah. Also, too, what touching on what you said, Patty Jenkins also trusts silence and trusts quiet moments in these movies. So many of these movies are just so loud from the opening credits to the end that you feel like you've been beaten up by the movie. And she lets you catch your breath in ways that feel earned. After Diana defeats Ares and Steve is dead, and you see the soldiers coming out of his thrall, and it's just a very quiet moment. You just see the mundaneness of war and why do we choose to do this stuff, and to trust silence in this era of where everything's bigger, louder, more colorful is once again a testament to her and a testament to the studio for allowing that to be in one of these big, loud superhero blockbusters, because the quiet moments I think are the moments that are the most memorable moments of this movie.
All right, guys, that's any final little thoughts?
Oh man, I don't know if I have any left. No, I just, again, more than a DCEU issue, this was just refreshing to me as a movie fan and a comic book fan to see that this was just a flat out good movie.
And see it in a theater. Every audience I've seen it with, it is what we love about going to a movie theater. There was no texting, there was no talking. It was 300 people all in this shared experience of enjoying this journey into this new world. You've got to see it in the theater. If you have any girlfriends, wives, daughters, sisters, nieces, aunts, bring them, because watch. I can't wait to see it again, to watch women watch the movie, because it's just. Well,
we can go see it together. I'm getting together
absolutely.
with Alicia Malone and a bunch of other ladies, and we're going to go with Mark, and Dan's invited, and you guys are invited. Let's all go see it together and have a good time together, because one of the things that I really do like about this film is that it is an experience that I really believe everyone is invited to enjoy. Yeah. So I hope that you did and you do. I don't know why you've been watching this review if you haven't seen the film yet.
Just ruined the movie for you.
The whole thing.
Yeah.
Thank you for sticking with us. That was quite a marathon, but we have two great experts with us today. And thank you, gentlemen, for joining us and lending your insight to this wonderful film. You guys let us know what you thought in the comments below. You can also tweet at us at HJ News, at Roth Cornett.
At Mark Andraco on Twitter, and you can follow me on Facebook.
At Merle Dan on Twitter, and you can tune into Dan's Lab on Monday. We'll be talking more Wonder Woman.
Wonder Woman. That's the old one, but still, she likes it. Click here for more awesome Screen Junkies news and click the logo to subscribe.